Good morning. So, just to recap a little bit from last week, for those that were here and have forgotten, or those who were not here, I did children's time, and I think I freaked the kids out a little bit when I said that I didn't go to church when I was a kid. Church just wasn't part of my life as a child, and so it came on for me in a different way. And so I wanted to tell a little bit more of that story. And I have told parts of it here before, but I think stories are really important. And hearing those stories and telling those stories can be very important. So I met Jesus for the first time when I was a teenager. I was in a pretty lonely and depressed place. And after meeting Jesus there, I went to a church, more or less for the first time, to try to make sense of that. And in good Southern Baptist fashion, I was baptized a week later. Now, it probably took me about a year for my brain to catch up with my heart and everything that was going on. But there was something going on inside of me, and I was hooked. The next year, I went off to college. It was a Christian college where I began to learn a little bit more about Jesus, and I began to learn about this strange group of people from the 16th century called the Anabaptists. For those who don't know, the Anabaptists were a group of people that were called by Jesus to live out their faith in a radical new way, and were kind of lumped together as a group of people, and they are sort of the forebears, the ones that came before and brought about what we now call the Mennonite Church. I learned about these Anabaptists at this college, and I thought this Jesus guy was so compelling, caring for the little, the lost, and the lowly. And finding this group of Christians who seemed like they really wanted to try to be a community of Jesus' disciples. This was revolutionary to me. The only Christians I had known of were the ones that maybe we cringe at a little bit today. But I was hooked. And even though I planned to go to this Christian college for just a year or two, before I knew it, 4 years had gone by and I had a Bachelor of Arts degree in Bible. So, of course, what else do you do when you have that? Well, you work at Starbucks, and you get connected with a local church. And there is when I got this taste for ministry. And the pastors there encouraged me and kind of took me under their wing to show me what it means to be a pastor. I resisted, but those moments were important in my life. I went off to seminary because I planned to be a teacher. I wanted to be a professor, not a pastor. But God had other ideas, and I felt this calling into pastoral ministry and accepted my first pastorate just about 10 years ago from now. When that pastorate was coming to an end, I found myself still feeling that call. I wasn't sure, but it was a clear calling on my life. Again, I was hooked. The rest you mostly know because it's been here. But telling this story is important for us, and it's important for me especially, because remembering our past helps to anchor us in the present so that we can boldly venture into the future. I recall this story especially in moments of change or when things are starting to pivot in life. It's important to remember God's presence and faithfulness. And I think that's what these texts that we heard just a moment ago are all about. Now, we're in this series called The Narrative Imperative, using the narrative lectionary to go through the Bible kind of in a year and to get this whole story of the Bible. We've heard some stories so far that have come from the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus. But of course, there were many stories left out, which is why with our reading plan, we also included links to the Bible Project so you can see more of the full picture. But today's text is a little different. The characters and the story elements have been kind of stripped away, leaving just these teachings, some very important teachings. But I want to fill in some blanks so you know how we got from where we were last Sunday to here. Last Sunday, we heard about Moses' call, his experience of the burning bush. And that story continues as he works with the Egyptian leaders, and God sends plagues upon Egypt. Then all the Israelites and some of their friends are released by Pharaoh, but then later pursued by Pharaoh until they get to the Red Sea. There, Moses, with God's help, performs a miracle. The Red Sea is parted and they walk on dry land. They are delivered to a new place. They come to Mount Sinai, where God attempts to make this covenant with them, where the Ten Commandments first show up in the book of Exodus. But they struggle. The people create this golden calf to worship. They are fearful, they are complaining. And as a result, they end up wandering the wilderness for 40 years. This 40 years essentially meant that any of the adults that participated in the creation of this golden calf and were full of this fear and complaining, well, they would have died in that 40-year period. So after they had done this wandering and a new generation is starting to take their place in leadership and in life of the community, we hear these texts read again. This is where the Ten Commandments shows up in Deuteronomy, like we heard just a moment ago. They are repeated for the sake of a new generation, almost as if it is read for the first time, or maybe as a second chance. These are anchoring stories in the life of Israel. So we're going to work our way through these as we recognize that we too are part of this deliverance, that we too experience what Moses and the people experienced. We too are a new generation called into this faithfulness. But we're not going to do that in order. I don't know why, but at some point in my life, I realized, or I figured out, that it was easier for me to solve a maze like the one you see on the screen by not starting at the start, by flipping it around and starting from the end and working my way back. I'm not sure why or when I learned this. I'm just embracing my weirdness and going with it. So we're going to work our way backwards through the text that we heard and back even further, starting with this text that came from Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 to 9, commonly referred as the Shema. This is a prayer that is recited daily in Jewish communities, even still today, and was an important part of their learning of what it meant to be God's people. And it mainly comes in two parts. The first one, Yahweh, YHWH, which is Yahweh, or some communities will pronounce it Jehovah. Those are just the letters in Hebrew transferred into English letters that we use to identify God's name. Often in your Bible, it might show up as all capital letters, Lord. That is honoring the Jewish tradition of not writing the name of God. I didn't honor that here because I wanted that name to be shown to us here. But the second part comes as we look at what loving Yahweh looks like. It means using all of our mind, our heart, our strength. Now, even though the Ten Commandments being told show up before this text, when we think of the formation of the Israelite people, this recited prayer would have been probably the first thing that kids would learn. So if you think of, the first words that kids might say, or the first things they might do together as a family, this would have been it. They would learn that they are to love God and worship God alone, and then what that looks like. Okay, moving backwards through our maze, let's move to Deuteronomy 5, which is the Ten Commandments. Again, we end up with a parallel going on in these Ten Commandments. These two passages are connected with the first words that we hear, "Hear, O Israel." which is a clue that we should probably look at these two together, which when I did, I realized that there's overlap in how these are structured. It starts with Yahweh is the only God you worship. And then the next 9 things, the next 9 commandments that we see, they show what it means to worship God in all arenas of life, religiously, politically, interpersonally. They show a design for how life can be. Now, these 2 passages actually come as part of a larger section preparing the Israelites, the people who had been wandering for 40 years, to end that time of wandering and to enter into the promised land. Remembering their past anchors them in the present so that they can boldly move into the future. Okay, we're going to make one more jump back. We're going to jump all the way back to the first books of Genesis. And maybe you're getting tired of me bringing this up, but too bad. The first 11 chapters of Genesis set up one way that we can read the rest of the Bible. Genesis 1 and 2 place humanity in harmony with creation and especially their creator. But Genesis 3 to 11 are the stories of that unraveling, bit by bit. But in each of these instances where humanity chooses their own way instead of God's way, we experience the grace of God. Boundaries are set up. Protection is granted. Recreation happens, and redirection creates new possibilities. Many stories in our scriptures are built off of one or more of these templates for what it is like to live. In many ways, it shows the nature of human existence, that we will struggle back and forth with this desire to be faithful and then struggling with what it means to live with God, but also receiving that grace. But here in Deuteronomy, in the text we heard just moments ago, we have a mega dose of grace and blessing. I'm convinced that we have over and over misread God's intentions here. That we've assumed that the 10 Commandments are a condition for God's love. But that can't be true. Moses himself was a murderer. Jacob was a thief and did not honor his father and mother. Abraham was a liar and was not a faithful husband. And yet God still covenanted with them. God still wanted to live in close relationship with them. And so, while it's helpful for us to explain the 10 Commandments as rules when we are children, when we experience this as adults, I have to say, it's time to grow up. Covenants are more than just rules. They are a promise of fidelity. They're not a legal obligation. Now, I don't want you to hear that there shouldn't be boundaries and standards. I think that does come through in the text and in the Bible in general to us. But as we think about covenants, as we are making covenants this month with one another, as we reenact the covenant, the new covenant and everlasting covenant in Jesus today, I hope that we will focus not on the rules, but we will focus on the relationship. We don't make covenants because we're agreeing to be perfect, but we're committing to one another in our imperfection. In fact, I think when God gave Jacob the name Israel, and then God's people took it on for themselves, that was for a very good reason. Because part of our vocation, our calling in life, is to wrestle with God. It's to continue to strive at what it means to live with God and with one another, knowing that we will get it wrong sometimes, but also knowing that the grace of God will be there for us still. So what does this mean for us? Now again, I don't want you to hear me saying that we just need to toss out the Ten Commandments as ways of living. We don't want to go out from here lying and stealing and coveting. But instead, thinking of this as a way of living in a human community. And so I want to highlight two applications for this. The first is that anchor stories are important. I shared a few of my anchor stories in the beginning of this sermon. And we will share some more as a community. In years past, the congregation, when we have done this covenant month, we've often created a visual that we could grasp onto, that we could physically see. Last year it was hanging on that wall with the doves on it. This year we're going to do something a little different. Since we're doing the narrative lectionary this year, a collection of stories, we also want our stories to be a part of that. And so if you noticed or have not, on the back of your bulletin for today, there are story prompts. These prompts are a way for us to think about, to reflect on how God has shown up in our life, how we have responded to God's calling and leading. Now, I'm not saying you need to answer all of these. Actually, I'd prefer if you picked one and told one story. Because what we're going to do is we're going to have a binder up front where we can bring forward our covenants, but also bring forward our stories and add them together into this binder and have basically a collection of our stories. As Amy mentioned, we're going to call this the Book of Lives. It's the lives of us here at Silverwood, and we will share these with one another. I think it's also, if you feel like you can, I know some of us struggle with writing things out by hand, but I think it'd be really neat if we took the time and actually wrote out our stories by hand. We'll have those little protector sliding papers, I don't know what they're called, the plastic sheets that you can slide, sheet protectors. We'll have those to kind of protect your stories so that we can all then read those and learn from each other's experiences. Telling those stories is so important. It provides us with an anchor. Second, I think these stories, or the text that we heard today, remind us of how covenanting with God and with one another is so important. As I said, covenants are a promise of fidelity, a promise to be in relationship with one another. So in addition to bringing forward your covenants and your stories, we will be signing this book saying that we want to covenant and journey together. We will have different ways that we do that. Everyone is invited to write their name in the Book of Lives. And today we're going to do, as we will be doing every first Sunday of the month, we are going to share communion together. This is a reenactment, a way of embodying our faith and our commitment to one another and to God. As it says at the beginning of Deuteronomy 5, which we heard so long ago, you've probably already forgotten, Moses convened all of Israel. All the people came together. And in a way that's happening today as well. As it's World Communion Sunday, there are Christians gathering around the world to celebrate communion today. And so in a way, we gather with all of Israel, all of God's people, to share in the blessing of communion. Today, because of that, we are using breads from a variety of cultures. So when you get your communion elements, you will have more than one bread in that cup. When you receive that, you can go back to your seat with it, and you can snack on the first two. I think there's 3 or 4. however many there is, just make sure you have one left, because we will take the bread and take the cup together following. This is a symbolic way for us to engage in communion together as we remember and worship the one true God. So if I could have those who are serving come up and kind of start taking your place, you know what to do, hopefully. For the rest of us, as we are planning to come forward, we're going to have one set of servers here, one in the middle, and one over here. Invite you to just approach the space that is most convenient for you. If you need gluten-free, the gluten-free is all up at the front here, and it has been kept separate from everything else, so it should be free of cross-contamination. I think that's all the instructions I need to give you, other than to say that when you receive the bread, somebody will speak words along the lines of, receive the bread of life for the whole world. And when you receive the cup of the new covenant for all people. As I said, eat some, but save some, because when we come back together, we will take the elements together. Let us begin.